I'd like to start today with just a little bit of housekeeping. Last week, you may recall that we had to cancel Sunday services because of concerns about the weather, which ultimately turned out to be unfounded, but what are we going to do? So I'm very happy to say that our second annual poetry service, which would have happened last week, has been rescheduled for next week, the 16th, complete with all of the originally planned special music. So I'm very excited about that. That, however, preempts the service that I would have given next week. And rather than continue to bump them all on down the line, I'm just going to sort of absorb some of that service into this sermon today. That doesn't mean this is going to be a 40-minute sermon, I promise. It's just not going to be quite the sermon originally advertised. We're going to go a little bit different direction. So, as I said, owing to Angela Buckman's faulty prognostications, I found myself a little extra time on my hands last Sunday. And so our living room couch found itself with a little extra me on its hands last Sunday, or on its cushions anyway. And what that me was doing was watching television. Specifically movies, and specifically Star Trek. There was a lot of Star Trek on Netflix. And Star Trek, funnily enough, got me thinking about the service this week. Now, the whole premise of Star Trek, if you don't know, is that it's set in the future in the 24th century, and humanity has finally gotten its acts together in this future world. There's a united world government, there's peace, brotherhood, sisterhood, and shared prosperity, and there's this general global flowering of learning and science. They don't use money in the 24th century. They say people are motivated by a desire to better themselves and to better humankind. And so no longer squandering our energy on pointless conflict, humanity is able to harness its genius and its spirit and begin properly exploring the stars, not for the purpose of conquest or economic gain, but to advance human knowledge. It's an overwhelmingly optimistic view of the future, rooted in a deeply humanist vision and humanist values about reason and science and cooperation and human potential. And I think as a pop culture artifact, it is rather unique in that sense, of presenting that consistently optimistic humanist vision. So, why did that have me thinking about today's service? Well, this year we've been exploring our 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, devoting a month to each principle. And March is devoted to our 6th principle, which says we affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And when I say this principle to myself, we affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, maybe just owing to the cadence of it, I've always been reminded of like the old George Reeves black and white Superman TV show. Does anyone remember that?
Oh, yes.
The monologue, Superman, strange being from another planet, fighting a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way. And so in my head, the 6th principle was always the Superman principle. Right? Peace, liberty, and justice for all. And so what used to strike me most about the 6th principle was how big those goals are, how unattainably lofty they seem to me. Almost, dare I say, a little grandiose. World community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Goals worthy of a Superman, no doubt. But the rest of us are just people, strange beings from this planet, without any superpowers at all. And the reality of those goals seemed a little remote to me. And so it was a little challenging to approach how do I think about this principle in a way that's concrete and livable and attainable. But through the magic process of lying on my couch and watching television, through that strange alchemy that happens when we do nothing, I've come to see our 6th principle in a different light. And it's been illuminated for me. I've come to think of our 6th principle not as the Superman principle, but as the Star Trek principle. Because what strikes me most about our 6th principle today is its audacious optimism. And what that optimism says about the religious values and the religious worldview that support it and underlie it. What it says about the Unitarian Universalist way of seeing the world and being religious, which is a deeply grounded in humanism. And by humanism, I don't mean atheism. Humanism is not about whether you do or don't believe in something you call God or gods or goddesses. Humanism is about a fundamental way of orienting ourselves to the world and to our place in it as human beings. So, there's a branch of theology with the technical name of eschatology. Eschatology, which is the study of how a religion views the end times. A religion's eschatology is a statement about how that religion thinks about history. Its purpose, if it has a purpose. Its end, if it has an end, and our place in history as humans. And in traditional Christian eschatology, the story of human history has basically already been told in the big picture, right? We may not know some of the fine details in the middle, but we know how it starts. We know how it's going to end. Humankind struggles along, mired in our original sin. The world falls deeper and deeper into evil, into the embrace of the Antichrist in a mythological statement, or in a literal statement, depending on what you believe. It falls deeper and deeper into corruption, and then Christ returns and human history ends. I heard a woman say on a call-in radio show once, "I'm saving up money so my baby can go to college, assuming Christ doesn't come back before then." That's a very different view of how humans are embedded in the flow of history and where that flow might take us and what possibilities the future might hold for us and whether or not we should even bother trying to do certain things. In such a worldview, there's no question of bringing about global community with peace, justice, and liberty for all, of elevating human life above violence and greed and destructive competition to some final state of happiness. That's not the point of history, to bring about that vision. And the attempt to do so is viewed, especially by conservative thinkers, as a sort of destructive error to which liberals are particularly prone. It's called, this is my favorite set of $5 words, by the way, this error to which we are supposedly particularly prone. It's called immanentizing the eschaton. Immanentizing the eschaton. You'll read this occasionally, particularly in conservative publications. And it's really just a fancy way of saying trying to create the kingdom of heaven on earth. Heaven is in heaven in the conservative view, not on earth. And by conservative, I don't mean politically conservative. I'm not talking Republican versus Democrat. The sort of theologically conservative versus theologically liberal. Heaven is in heaven, not on earth. The end of human history is not the realization of some Star Trek-like vision of peace and progress, because such a thing can never be. And not understanding that in the conservative view leads to hubris. It leads to attempts to sort of forcibly create utopias on earth that are impossible. And in the process of trying to create those utopias, the argument goes, we sort of bulldoze over people because we don't accept their limitations, and it leads to tyranny, and it leads to violence. And conservative thinkers in this mode would point to things like the Great Terror in the French Revolution, or the history of communist oppression in the 20th century, as failed attempts to create heaven on earth. And this line of thinking says if we find the world mired in cruelty and wickedness and corruption, it is because that is the way of the world, and that is the way of human nature. So, Unitarian Universalism as a form of humanism has an entirely different idea about history and our place in it. In the first place, humanism and Unitarian Universalism rejects the notion of the world as a fallen place. It rejects the idea that the world is a vale of tears, that the world is the devil's playground, that the world is an ungodly place where we are destined and condemned to wander as lost people. It rejects the notion that the material realm is wicked. What it emphasizes instead, what our religious tradition emphasizes, is the unity of the material world and the spiritual world. And what that means is not that the world is intrinsically good, but that the world is the proper sphere in which human beings can lead fully actualized lives. Lives of meaning, purpose, beauty, dignity, and happiness. Our religious vision says that a world of peace, liberty, and justice is possible, and it can be realized in history. In the second place, humanism and Unitarian Universalism, as a form of humanism, rejects the idea that humans are irredeemably wicked, that we are fallen, that we are corrupt or deluded, such that the path of human history is to sort of muddle along until we are finally rescued by a Savior. Our sixth principle doesn't just imply that world peace and justice are somehow possible, it says outright how it expects such a world to come about. We are to create it. It will come about through our own efforts, if it is to come about at all. So Unitarian Universalism holds out the hope that we are up to the task, ultimately, of this optimistic vision. Now, that doesn't mean that Unitarian Universalism or humanists or religious liberals in general have to be committed to the idea of intrinsic human goodness. There's sometimes an interpretation of our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of all people, that means that we maintain that everyone is inherently good. And I would suggest that that is not necessary. And a fair critique of humanism, going all the way back to Edmund Burke writing on the French Revolution, if you're familiar with him, is that humanists and do-gooders and world reformers and liberals in general do not take the problem of human evil seriously enough. That we have not always taken the problem of human evil seriously enough. That we tend to assume that humans are intrinsically good. And if they seem bad, it's just because society made them so. And if we would just free people from oppressive institutions, they would naturally start behaving in a way that was healthy and rational, and they would make good choices, and they would be peaceful and cooperative and selfless, and this could just kind of happen. And we know that it's really not that simple, right? The 21st century vision of humanism is more complex than that. Even in our own supposedly progressive Unitarian history, we know that a lot of communes launched with the best of intentions have foundered on the shoals of seemingly intractable human nature, spilling a lot of organic fair trade quinoa in the process. So, in the 21st century, Unitarian Universalism and humanism takes more seriously the complexity of human motives and human behavior, the many shades of light and dark that are woven into us. We know that many times we will be our own worst enemies in the struggle for peace. We know that humanity cannot be neatly divided into oppressed angels and oppressing demons. We know that it's not as simple as knocking down bad institutions so that our natural human goodness can just kind of shine out. What I would say is that a commitment to our sixth principle does not require a belief in human goodness. It only asks for a belief in human good enoughness. Human good enoughness. And the gap between goodness and good enoughness is bridged with patience, charity, compassion, commitment, and a lot of hard work. Work at the institutional level and work at the interpersonal level. So let's talk about the institutional level first. The Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, which is our umbrella organization, supports work for world peace and world justice in a variety of ways. There's an international office which exists specifically to help congregations live out our sixth principle. They provide resources, they engage issues on an international level, and they partner with other international organizations. It's called the Faith Without Borders program. We have a United Nations office, which exists to do international advocacy work at the UN. It's been there in one form or another for 50 years. And it advocates on issues such as climate change, LGBT rights, women's rights, nonviolence, and more. Separate from the UUA is the UU Service Committee, which is an organization which works for human rights and social justice in the U.S. and around the world. And we raise funds for them every year here through our Guest at the Table program. And right now the UUSC is working in Haiti. They're working in places like California and Grenada to provide people with access to safe drinking water. They do a lot of very good work. As an aside, some of you may know that our symbol of the flaming chalice was originally the symbol of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, back during World War II when it was just the Unitarian Service Committee. And at that time, they were doing the very dangerous work of helping Jews escape from Nazi Germany, Nazi-occupied Europe. And they needed a logo to easily identify their agents across the boundaries of language and borders, so they commissioned this symbol of the chalice. And decades later, after the merger that created UU, the image of the chalice was spontaneously adopted by UU churches. There was no official pronouncement. Churches just started taking it on to represent our deepest values. So the symbol of our religious faith grew out of spies fighting Nazis, people who literally risked their life for peace, liberty, and justice in the world. And how awesome is that? So to be sure, we're a small religious body in the United States. There's maybe 150,000 of us who belong to churches, maybe another couple 100,000 who identify as UU. So we're talking about 0.5% of the population. But we have a history of punching above our weight class when it comes to influencing policy and shaping institutions. And we should be proud of the work that we do at the international level. And so I encourage you to check out the website uua.org and see the different ways that we are working as a denomination to make a difference in the world. So that's the institutional side. And there's also the personal work that we need to do. And I'm going to pivot just a little bit. And I apologize for introducing another concept kind of late into the sermon. This is an artifact of having merged two together. But I promise we're wrapping up here, okay? So every month that we've talked about one of our principles, we've introduced sort of a related virtue or concept designed to help us live out that principle, to make it more concretely expressed in our lives. And I was having trouble deciding on one for our sixth principle. I think, again, because it's so big and because it seems kind of remote, right? World peace, world justice. So I was talking about this to our fabulous director of religious education, Natalie, because she and I planned these services together. And she suggested that a related virtue might be kindness and generosity. Generosity with our stuff and generosity with our spirit. And that really worked for me because it humanized our sixth principle, and it brought it down to a scale that I could relate to, and it reminded me of the wisdom of our second reading. That ultimately, if there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the hearts. So our readings and our hymns have introduced that theme of kindness today. And we're going to be exploring it throughout the month in more depth. The sequel to this service really is the multi-generational service on generosity and kindness that we will be having in 2 weeks. So I encourage you to be there for that. But today I wanted to just set the stage for this exploration by introducing this idea that the necessary foundation of world peace is peace in the heart. And we can't really, in a naive way, just rely on human goodness that there will be peace in the heart, that it will just happen. But I think we can rely on human good enoughness and say optimistically that peace in the heart can be cultivated. And once cultivated, it can become habits of kindness and generosity. And once those habits become a part of our life, they are contagious. Peace in the heart can radiate out from us, and peaceful habits and peaceful ways of living can be taught. So one of the things that we do here as a church in support of our sixth principle on the human scale is to give people a weekly opportunity to cultivate peace in the heart. And through our religious education program, we teach our children the habits of peace in the heart. And we partner with organizations like the Peace Learning Center to teach people peaceful ways of being with one another. It's some of the most valuable work that we do, and it supports not just interpersonal peace, but on up the chain, in the family, in the community, in the world. So, I would like to challenge everyone for the month of March. Whatever it is now that makes you feel peaceful, that makes you feel centered in kindness and generosity, whatever sort of spiritual practice you might have, whether it's gardening, yoga, meditating, listening to music, praying, walking, whatever it is that gets you to that place, I invite you to try doing it every day, even if it's for just 5 or 10 minutes, and to be intentional about the purpose of it. To take 5 to 10 minutes every day, and when you do your prayer or your meditation or your music or whatever it is, say, I'm doing this today because I want more peace in my heart. I want more loving kindness in my heart. And the last thing that I'm going to do today is to share my own practice, because I've started doing this in preparation for this service, and because just in general, I wanted more peace in my own heart. So I've started taking about 5 to 10 minutes every day, and I do a little bit of mindful meditation, which we've talked about, listening to my breathing, relaxing, centering myself, coming to a quiet place. And I'll leave you with the words that I've been saying when I get to that place. And I'm not really saying them to anyone in particular, I'm just saying them. May I be released from worry. May I be released from anxiety and fear. May I be filled instead with loving kindness. May no unkind word pass my lips, but may I bring peace with me wherever I go. May I make of my home a comfort and a refuge, a place of love and joy. May my family know that they are deeply loved in all I say and do. And may I bring peace with me wherever I go. I ask these things with a willing heart, knowing that I may need to change. I ask these things with a humble heart, knowing I have fallen short in the past. I ask these things with a ready heart. May it be so. Would you please rise for our closing hymn, number 1026, if everyone